listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Mike. I'll be the host here for you this morning. We're wrapping our show. This is our fourth segment this morning. And I've titled it Clueless. Self-serving and dangerous. Welcome to an inside view of our Congress. See, it's not just the White House. It's not just the Department of Justice. It's not just the IRS. It's the Congress itself, which has failed our nation. And failed they have, folks. They have allowed our nation to be weakened domestically, internationally, and it's really not even explainable how we got to this point. I mean, when you look at the political ideological divide, one has to wonder, how did we arrive at this point? I mean, the Republicans call themselves the opposite of the Democrats. And yet, they have completely and utterly and totally and epically failed. You know, this article out here this morning that Worldview, it's in Breitbart, and I'll post a link to the YouTube channel. U.S. Naval Intelligence Chief confirms the worst fears of China's military buildup. Now, I've been telling you for months and longer that the real threat here to the United States is not necessarily Al-Qaeda, that it is countries like Russia and China who are sitting there watching the United States. And if you think of it like where a swimmer in the water has been wounded and they're just swimming around waiting for the opportune time to slide in and take a huge bite, that's pretty accurate. This is a nation that is extremely rich in natural resources. Untapped natural resources. This is a nation which is doubly considered to be a pain in the neck for the likes of totalitarian regimes like China and Russia, who, you know, for whatever reason, feel a lot of animosity towards us. Some of it genuine or realistic and probably realistically directed at us, and some of it propagandized within their own societies. But China is becoming boldly aggressive. And they are arming themselves for what I would look at to be the equivalent of the old Cold War that we had with the USSR until the breakup. China doesn't like the fact that the United States has treated the Pacific Ocean like its own bathtub since World War II. And they are determined to evict the United States from any place that even comes close to a Chinese boundary or border. They're also determined to make sure that they have every nation that is within their immediate sphere of influence allied to them or terrified of them, including Taiwan, Japan, Indonesia, the Malaysias. They have been working for a very, very long time at building their military to a point where they can intimidate anyone within a relatively short distance of China. They can project enough power, and they're utilizing the Navy to do so with carriers they're building and others, that they can project enough power to basically remove any foe or intimidate any country within a reasonable sphere of influence. That's pretty much everybody on the western side of the Pacific, folks. James Fannell, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Intelligence and Information Operations in the U.S. Pacific Fleet, says, quote, "We witnessed the massive amphibious and cross-military region enterprise, Mission Action 2013. That's what they called it. We concluded that the PLA, which is the People's Liberation Army, that's the militaristic side of China, has been given the new task to be able to conduct a short, sharp war to destroy Japanese forces in the East China Sea, following what can only be expected as a seizure of the Senkakus or even a southern Ryukyu Islands." This, for the record, if you're not familiar with the Senkakus, that Keikos, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it, but I've heard it both ways. Two tiny little islands they're in contention for. Japan says they own them, and historically have, at least in the last, 50, 70 years. China says they're theirs. And China is using it as a pretext to basically go in and clean Japan's clock. He goes on to say that tensions in the South and East China Seas have deteriorated, with the Chinese Coast Guard playing the role of antagonist, harassing China's neighbors, while the PLA Navy ships, their protectors, make port calls throughout the region promising friendship and cooperation. This concept of a short and sharp attack on Japan is not good. And the reason for that is because we are the guarantors of Japan's safety and security. And if Japan gets pulled into a conflict, we are obligated to step in. This is dangerous in the sense that we've got the economic and political and military risks associated with China as a nuclear power and the United States as nuclear powers. And quite honestly, it leaves us in a position where we've got a deteriorating political role across both the two superpowers that are really left. Russia, forget them for a moment. Let's just concentrate on China and the United States. The role that we're in here is similar to, if you will, when we saw global conquest go on in other nations. And I would be using the example here of the steps that Hitler took when he invaded Poland in a short, sharp attack. China has been building the idea that they want to do this with their own people, kind of casting Japan in a negative light, and so forth and so on for quite some time. Now, don't misunderstand me here. I don't care where you stand politically on this. Japan and China have been enemies for a very long time. And Japan is responsible for some seriously evil work that has been done in China. If you're not familiar with that history, I encourage you to go look it up. But what I am concerned about is when we're sitting here looking at our involvement and how we get drawn into this. And then you see a guy like Putin over there who's licking his chops and salivating, waiting for us to make a misstep somewhere. We got drawn into the conflict in World War II. We got drawn into a conflict in World War I the same way, where we were stepping in on the side of someone else when we actually had virtually no skin in the game. And it almost, well, quite frankly, in both instances, if you look at World War I and World War II, we either allowed ourselves to be drawn in, i.e. Pearl Harbor, and no one, by the way, at this stage in the game, who looks at that in an objective and intellectually honest perspective will say that we did not know it was going to happen. The Japanese did do it, but we knew they were going to do it. If you doubt the veracity of that, go do your own due diligence. And do it with an open mind and critical thinking, and you will be surprised at what you learn. World War I is now widely understood to have been, and the sinking of the Lusitania was, excuse me, is openly understood to have been allowed, in fact, even encouraged by the White House at the time, so that we could get into World War I. What will be the motivator for this one? This particular article poses a couple of scenarios, and I would encourage you to, go out there and do your own homework and look at them. But I got to say that where we look at, or how we look at this, irrespective of whether we think, we should or can even do anything about this, we need to recognize China for what it is, which is a dangerous enemy who looks at us and is actually looking for a provocation to strike at an age-old enemy. One, to kind of flex and test their muscle. The problem with it is that, when you get two people in a corner like that, and two guys who think they're the big kids on the block, sometimes it's more than just a punch or two that gets thrown. And it can get out of hand. The other side of this whole thing is that no matter how you look at it, these inept bunglers in Congress and, quite frankly, the Pentagon, they're not the ones who actually fight it. And I, for one, am tired of seeing our young men and women sacrificed for some political game. The Pentagon has issued a statement saying that they expect to have peace in our time. Didn't we hear that in World War I and II and the Gulf of Tonkin? Yeah, I get it. They're trying to change the statement of their own guy, which is this James Fannell. And they come out and say, what I can tell you about what Secretary Hagel believes is that we all continue to believe that the peaceful, prosperous rise of China is a good thing for the region, for the world. We continue to want to improve our bilateral military relations with China, and that we also think that a major component of that is increased transparency on their part about the investments they're making and the operations they're conducting, and that's where I leave it. Well, that's a little utopian, don't you think? I guess I'm tired of the culture of defeat. And I think that's where our nation is trapped. We allow ourselves to be toyed with, batted around as if we were nothing more than a tennis ball or something, where we have, these people who are making decisions on our behalf, which clearly have no resultant best interest position for us. And I think it's time America stood up and said enough's enough. I think it's time that we, collectively as a nation, said, you know what? We've had enough with a lot of you. We're not alone, by the way. It's happening right now in the Ukraine. The United States would have you believe that the Ukrainian people are fighting to separate themselves from Russia because they don't want to be lorded over by the Russians, and that they want to side with the European Union. The truth of the matter is there's an entire contingent in Ukraine who says We don't want to be a part of Russia, and quite frankly, we don't want to be a part of the European Union either. If this administration has its way, they would simply latch on to, the Ukraine would latch itself to the European Union, where it could be plundered by the tyrants in Belgium. We see over and over and over again where nations are rising up against statist governments. It's happening in Venezuela right now. Just happened recently in Egypt. We saw the Arab Spring in Egypt. And no matter how much money we threw at assisting totalitarianism there through the Obama administration, the people stood up against it. I mean, in massive numbers. Who's ever seen almost half the population stand up against the government? In the Ukraine, we're seeing these people who have stood there against pretty significant odds and ousted this president who clearly violated their intentions. The truth is, I think people everywhere, there's an old song that I used to hear when I was a kid in the 70s, people everywhere just want to be free. And I believe that that is the case. I think most people just want to be left alone. What is with, and why must we constantly put up with this small cadre of oligarchs who insist that we can't just be left alone to live our own lives as best we see fit and as how we're most comfortable? We have to be put under the thumb of somebody who stands to gain from our misery. I mean, are you not tired of it? It's amazing to me. And we just keep falling for the same nonsense over and over and over and over and over. Doesn't anybody remember the adage that history repeats itself? Of course it does. I foresee a time somewhere in the near future where America has to come to a point where they make a determination and a decision. Are you going to fight for your own self-interest? Or are you going to just accept the fact that you are not in control of your own future, that your destiny is not set by you, but by others who don't consult you in its outcome or its direction? I mean, if you're willing to acquiesce to that, I suppose there's nothing that we can do. The question, I guess, you have to ask yourself is, what are you willing to do to stop it? What are you willing to do to say, no more? I get it. You don't want to lose your job. You don't want to lose your house. You don't want to lose your car, your summer residence, your pool, your fancy whatever. But I can only tell you one thing, and that is that if we don't bring this under some control, all those things that you have valued, whether they be material or immaterial, are about to be lost to you. And I don't think America quite gets that yet. I don't think everybody really understands, because we don't have any, even collective memory of what it's like to live under tyranny. I mean, the last tyranny we lived with here that was overt was 235 years ago. No one was around then. The problem, I think, is that we have shut our eyes to the realities of what the rest of the world experiences almost every day in this, kind of a fantasy hope that it won't happen to us. I hate to say it, but I don't think that's necessarily the wisest way to go about living our lives. I don't think that's the wisest way to continue a way that we can move forward or even just defend and protect ourselves. It makes me very, very uncomfortable. And I'm hoping that, you'll see through the cries of utopia that are constantly poured upon you from the media and the news ministry of propaganda and government itself. I mean, I expect, government to do that because I've already long ago given up on them trying to be fair, objective, or actually working in our best interest. I'm actually even, don't get me wrong, I'm incensed about politicians who have betrayed us. But what hurts even more than that, because I expect a politician to abuse their power. What is infuriating and hurtful and hard to grasp is the fact that the media has become part of it. And I believe that ultimately it will be the undoing of this great nation. And that, indeed, folks, is a sad day. You've been listening to America's Voice. My name is Michael Evans. Today is Monday. Not sure what tomorrow holds. We'll try to take a look at it. I have been thinking about doing some changes to the program, and as I put that together, I will go back and bring it to your attention because I'd like your input and feedback before I do that. This isn't just my program. There's a lot of you that listen on a very consistent and loyal basis, and I'd like you to be involved in that. So as our plans and ideas become more solidified, I'll be more than happy to review that with you, and I'd like your feedback. You can always communicate with us by sending me email to mike@americasvoicenow.org. That's mike@americasvoicenow.org. Later this week, I'll have Jack Spirko on with us. He'll be doing an interview with me, I believe, on Wednesday. And, well, I'm sorry, it's not Wednesday. It's next week. But Jack is a great guy. I think you'll enjoy very much that opportunity to hear from him. And we may run that as a separate issue. I'm not sure if I can do it live. We're working on the scheduling for it. So, but in any event, feel free to ride with us tomorrow morning. Join us on our Facebook page. Join us on our website. You can find us at americasvoicenow.org. You can find us at facebook.com/America's Voice Now. You can find us at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. Please join us on patriotfb.com. That's Patriot F like Foxtrot, B like Bravo. It's a great site where you can join with other like-minded individuals, and it's similar to Facebook without all the censorship and the trolls. So I encourage you to participate with us. Feel free to communicate with me. Share these videos with your friends, or audio clips with your friends or your circle of influence if you find that there's anything valuable in them. And by all means, let's make sure that we're utilizing them to educate those around us. Educate, inform, motivate, and activate. While you're at it, I'd like you to just